So my request for the editor, please, if you would tell us your name and how you spell it.
You're on?
Yeah.
Yitzhak Buxbaum, Yitzhak Buxbaum.
Great.
And then, how would you like to be titled?
Maggid.
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 Got it. Now you're talking to Chuck.
Okay, so now you're talking to me.
Chuck,
Your eye line is to me.
should a little bit more, Chuck.
So I'll do the setting.
Okay, go ahead.
The Baal Shem Tov lived from 1700 to 1760. And it was a period of great turmoil among the Jews in Poland, which included almost all of Ukraine. In 1648, 1649, there were horrendous pogroms. Many Jews got displaced. And as a result, the religious level of education plummeted, and the economic status of the Jews plummeted. And also, at the same time, there was a false messiah, Shabtai Tzvi, who caused turmoil in the spiritual and religious aspect. So it was a time of great distress when the Baal Shem Tov was born and afterwards. One of the interesting things to know about the time is that there was a group of what are called hidden tzaddikim, hidden mystics. The rabbis were generally aloof and unsympathetic to the poor people, which was most of the people. This group of hidden mystics separated themselves from the rabbis and joined the people as manual laborers. They lived among the people, and they were mostly Kabbalists, and they had a movement of like an underground movement of spirituality and mysticism. Kabbalah was in bad odor at that time because Shabtai Tzvi, this false messiah, was a Kabbalist, used Kabbalah to justify his improper ways. So that was a movement going on at that time. And in fact, the leader of the movement was always called Baal Shem. The Hasidim say that when a person is in a faint, you wake him by calling out his name in his ear. So Israel, the people of Israel, was in a faint at this time. And the Hasidim say that God sent Israel, Baal Shem Tov, to wake them out of their faint by calling in their ear the name Israel. Carol? So today, too, we need, the Jewish people is in a faint. And we need to call out the name of Israel. Part of it is reviving the attachment to the Baal Shem Tov, but also to bring something new. Like Reb Zalman says, we don't want to just look backwards, we want to look forwards. The Baal Shem Tov, Baal Shem Tov is a title. It means literally the master of divine names. It refers to a person who's a Kabbalist and knows practical Kabbalah, meaning can use divine names to effect miracles. So the Baal Shem Tov is a faith healer. Very unusual thing. Very unusual. And there are a lot of miracle stories associated with him. And one of the reasons I wrote my book, The Light and Fire of the Baal Shem Tov, was because the book is the original book about the Baal Shem Tov, called Shivchei Baal Shem Tov, Praises of the Baal Shem Tov, were written specifically to highlight the miracles. The cousin or something, the relative of the author was the Baal Shem Tov's, the guy who wrote the Baal Shem Tov's amulets. So he was particularly interested in miracles and that end. And the author of the book says that he wants to show people that miracles can happen in our time. So it's all miracles. It's teeming with miracles. It's unworthy of the Baal Shem Tov, this great, great teacher. So I've always felt pain by this. And plus, every story in the Jewish world that was floating around at that time got attached to the Baal Shem Tov. So the commonplace stories overwhelmed the great ones. So I wanted to repair the situation Rabbi Shlomo Kolobach, my teacher, my Rebbe, said to me that the Rebbe's considered this early book a joke. So I wanted to write my book to replace it as a devotional scripture. And so I believe in miracles, but that's not the whole thing. That's not the whole thing. The Rebbe said, if you believe all the miracles, you're a fool. If you don't believe any, you're wicked. So, why was the Baal Shem Tov great? He was the greatest mystic in Jewish history. He not only was a great mystic, but he created a movement that in his own lifetime had tens of thousands of adherents, and today has millions. Before the decimation of World War II, 50% of the Jews in Eastern Europe were Hasidim. So he was a great influence in his own time, and everything alive in Judaism today relates to the Baal Shem Tov, across denominational lines. So the Baal Shem Tov has an influence. The stories, Hasidic melodies, Hasidic attitudes have an influence on all the Jewish denominations. He's very important for that reason. Also, he is a collective soul. In Hasidism, in Kabbalah, there's the idea of a collective soul, meaning somebody who's a leader, who the people who follow him are parts of his soul, are connected to his soul. So the higher or more amazing a leader is, the more different kinds of people he can relate to. So the Baal Shem Tov is a collective soul of a massive sort. And people who are intellectuals, non-intellectuals, Orthodox, non-Orthodox, people of every sort can relate to him. It's like a mysterious kind of personality that so many people can relate to. And on the one hand, he speaks directly to everybody. On the other hand, he's like mysterious. Rabbi Elimelech of Lezensk, one of the early rabbis, lived in the Baal Shem Tov's time, towards the end of his life, but never met him, and regretted it deeply. He begged heaven to show him who the Baal Shem Tov was. And they told him, go out at midnight and look at the sky. He went out at midnight, looked at the sky, and a huge conflagration burst into millions of sparks. And in each spark was a face of the Baal Shem Tov. Meaning that the Baal Shem Tov had a connection to every Jew. Maybe every human on earth. He was a transitional figure also. What makes him unique is he was a transitional figure. When he created the hidden mystics, he was part of this group called the Hidden Mystics. They were underground. And he brought it above ground for various reasons. He saw that they couldn't expand as needed, being a subterranean movement. He was the first one to bring it above ground and created the Hasidic movement. So, but he was transitional. See, he was the model for the Hasidic Rebbe. But he was himself a transitional figure between the previous era and his own, and the one he created. So there's nobody like him. There's nobody like him in being a Baal Shem, being a faith healer, a Kabbalistic faith healer. No, other Rebbes did miracles, but nobody was a Baal Shem. So he has traits that are very unusual because he's this transitional figure. He created a new era. I moved my head, yeah.
Don't forget to finish.
Yes, I realized my mistake.
Before you turn.
I realized my mistake, Anthony. Sorry.
Okay.
He's a realized mystic. You know, it's one thing to list the things that make up a mystic, how to get to be a mystic, what a mystic is. He is the finished product. He's a mystic. And so that means he has an authority to tell people how to become like he was, how to get to this stage. He was on fire for God. On fire for God.
Great. Thank you.
One second. There's a Hasidic parable that explains why he was different. Because a non-Hasidic rabbi asked a Hasidic Rebbe, Rabbi Yitzhak Isaac of Zidichev, why do we need the Baal Shem Tov? Wasn't Judaism already enough? So he told a parable to explain why the Baal Shem Tov was special and different. He said, you see, in Poland at that time, they used to elect the king. It's contrary to what we usually think, but they used to elect the king. So he said, somebody heard that in a foreign country there was a great candidate to be king, and brought back the report. Somebody after that actually went to that country and met that person and brought back the report they met them. Great candidate for the king. But a third person, actually brought this candidate back with them. And the people said, long live the king. So the Baal Shem Tov, the first one is the Shimon Bar Yochai, the great rabbi of ancient times, the disciple of Rabbi Akiva. He let us know about the godly, like it was a rumor of the godly realms. The Ari HaKodesh, the holy Yitzhak Luria, the great Kabbalist of the Middle Ages, it was still in heaven, but he brought it closer to us. But the Baal Shem Tov actually brought God right here. So people could experience God's presence and say, long live the king. How did he do it? He did it by putting the Tzaddik, the holy man, at the center. The charismatic holy man at the center. He put himself at the center. That's how he accomplished bringing God into people's lives. Because he represented God. See, a tzaddik is like God personified. A tzaddik, in fact, it says about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one of the Hasidic rabbis explained, that when a tzaddik eliminates their schmutz, their ego, all that remains is God, their divine soul. So the tzaddik is like God's representative. So Baal Shem Tov put himself at the center. Every great teacher has one or two parables that express the essence of their teaching. That's my experience. This parable is the essence of the Baal Shem Tov's teaching. A king created by magic many concentric walls around his palace. As you got close to the palace, the walls became more formidable, thicker, higher. They were guarded on their tops by fierce soldiers. At their bases, there ran wild animals, lions, bears. And then he retreated into his palace and sent out a proclamation that whoever came to visit him would be elevated to the status next to the king and be richly rewarded with wealth. So who wouldn't want this? Everybody came, but then they saw the first wall and the soldiers and the wild animals, and they were intimidated and afraid and turned back. Most of them. A few made it past the first wall. And the king had arranged that anybody who traversed the wall would be rewarded with money and jewels. Had servants distributing money and jewels. Some people got past the first wall, were rewarded, and they turned back. They were satisfied. So then some people got past they saw the second wall, and they were intimidated. They turned back. Or they got past the second wall, a very few, and they were rewarded, and they were satisfied and left. Nobody got past the third wall, except for the king's son. His only desire was to see his beloved father's face. And when he arrived at the scene, he saw the walls and said, how can my father be keeping me away? How am I ever going to see him? But he forged forward in fighting off the soldiers and the animals and went forward with great self-sacrifice. And he kept calling out, Father, Father. I want to see you so badly. Please, appear to me. And his situation got more and more desperate. Until finally the king instantaneously made all the walls disappear. Because they were just illusory. They were magic. And the son saw that his father was sitting right in front of him on a glorious throne, surrounded by gardens. There was nothing bad, nothing harmful, no soldiers, no wild animals. It was only just the king who wanted to see who truly loved him, who could overcome their fear and come to him. So this parable works on many levels. It shows that whatever obstacles seem to keep us from spiritual fulfillment are illusory. And if we push forward, they'll disappear. On the one level, the walls represent the Jewish version of Maya, the Hindu concept of an illusion. It's an illusion that keeps us from God. Because Jewish mysticism tells us that God is always here. There's nothing but God. This is all God. Everything in this room, my voice, every physical object, every non-physical thing, it's all God. There's only one. There's only God. So why don't we see it? Because the illusion that is the result of our lack of fervor, our lack of devotion. Why is the son the one who succeeds, or the daughter? Because you have to feel entitled. You have to feel this is not just for some Baal Shem Tov, some mystical figure in the past. He was also just an ordinary person, just like us. But he felt, I want to see my father or my mother. You have to feel entitled. And the son or the daughter is entitled as opposed to a servant. When he calls out, Father, Father, that's his essential spiritual practice, prayer. That's the essence of prayer. Father, Father. Or Mother, Mother. Hashem. That was his pinnacle practice. This parable also shows us the Baal Shem Tov's great moment of revelation. We don't have a story that describes his explosion of revelation. This story describes it, because what he's portraying in the parable is what happened to him. And we know that he studied with Achia Shiloni. Achia Shiloni was, Achia from the town of Shiloh, was a biblical prophet who, according to tradition, was the spiritual master of Elijah. So he's like even greater than Elijah. The only people he taught were Shimon Bar Yochai and maybe the Ari, I don't remember. But he was like, and Elijah was his student, so he's like above Elijah. Elijah appears to people mystically, to mystic adepts, and teaches them mystic knowledge. And this is not a Bubba Maisa. This is true. It happens today. There's different ways it can happen, but in some ways, a man with a beard appears in your room and teaches you the mystic secrets. Every religion has this. And so the Baal Shem Tov was taught by Elijah, but then by Achia. And I forgot what I was talking about. Oh yeah. So he studied in a cave with Achia. And at the end of 10 years, the tradition says, he completed his course of study. He went through the whole Torah with Achia. So I, from a number of sources, put together and created this story of how he was in the cave and he goes out and he sees that everything is one. He'd been at a high level previous to that, but he reached like the pinnacle. Everything is one. See, the mystic teaching is not that God is one, not 5 or 3. The mystic teaching is there's nothing but God. There's only one. There's only one reality. Normally we think that there's God and the world, 2 realities. The mystics teach the world is also God. So the immanent God and the transcendent God are one. There's only one. What the Hindus call Brahman, what we call the Ein Sof, the infinite. And all of Kabbalah is to show that the two are one. There's no two. There's only one. So this is when the Baal Shem Tov merged. When he exited the cave, he merged with this reality. And parenthetically, that's the painting. Okay. The essence of the Baal Shem Tov's teaching is love. That's the essence of the teaching of Judaism. You know, I wrote a book on Hillel, the great early rabbi of ancient times. And Hillel and later Akiba, those are the two candidates for the greatest rabbi of ancient times. They both said the essence of Judaism is loving your neighbor as yourself. Hillel put it in the form of the golden rule. The golden rule is the rule of thumb for the application of the commandment to love your neighbor. How do I love my neighbor? If you ask, how do I love my neighbor? As yourself. The golden rule. As you would want done to you, do to others. So they both said the essence of Judaism is love. But if you look around, the way Judaism is taught, you don't find it. It's a million things about customs and observances and holidays and everything, but love is the essence. And with Shlomo Kolobach, my Rebbe, drawing from the Baal Shem Tov, that is manifested and revealed. The essence is love. The Baal Shem Tov said, I came to this world to teach three loves. Love of God, love of the Torah, love of the Jewish people. And eventually he taught to love everybody. But this is what the Hindus call, the Hindus say, Bhagavan, Bhakta, the God, the devotee, and the Bhagavatam, the scripture, are one, mystically one. So in the Zohar, the main book of Kabbalah, it is God, the Torah, and Israel are mystically one. Same thing. God and the Jewish people are the manifestation of God in this world. The Shekhinah are mystically one, connected by the Torah. The Christians say Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Same thing. I mean, we don't say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah. God, Oh, sorry. So. Oh, okay. So one of my favorite stories about the Baal Shem Tov, it's not about him, it's about his parents actually. Because it says, this is a story, at a certain level in a movement, a religious or spiritual movement, people ask, how did these parents merit to have this child, the saintly child? So it's a certain genre of story. And the story goes that the Baal Shem Tov's parents were very pious and devoted to the mitzvah of hospitality. They lived in an out-of-the-way area, so it's hard to find Jewish travelers to host. And they actually hired somebody to sit at the crossroad and induce people to come and be their guest. And they would wait on them hand and foot. Because it says in the Talmud that receiving a guest is like receiving the Shekhinah, like receiving the divine presence. And they took it literally. A guest is like God. So their piety made a big impression in heaven. And it was decided to give them as a reward a child, see, they were very old with no children, a child of an extraordinary sort, because this is the Baal Shem Tov. His soul had been in heaven for hundreds of years, but could not come down to this earth, because every time prospective parents were selected, the Satan would complain they weren't worthy. So this soul was in heaven for a long, long time. And they were going to reward the Baal Shem Tov's parents, Eliezer and Sarah, with this august soul, this exalted soul. But a voice came in heaven, it's not right to reward them so much until they've been tested, and it was agreed. So Satan stepped forward and said, I'll test them. But Elijah the prophet interceded and said, no, you'll do everything to make them fail. I'll test them. So he tested them in the thing that was most precious to them, in the midst of hospitality. And on Saturday afternoon, early afternoon, Elijah showed up in the disguise of a wayfarer with a knapsack on his shoulder and dust on his feet, and knocked on the door and said, Good Shabbos, could I have hospitality? And they accepted him. And they saw that he had dust on his feet and says, Good Shabbos. He was traveling. He was desecrating Shabbat. But they did not say a word to him. They didn't rebuke him. They fed him. They took care of him. And they saw him off. They escorted him to the town border at night. And he revealed himself to them and said he was testing them. And because for the whole time they did not rebuke him for desecrating Shabbat. That was the test. And they passed. And he told them that they were going to receive a soul for a child that would light up the eyes of the world. So this prefigures why the Baal Shem Tov was great, because he didn't judge people. So if you love people, you can't judge them. You can't draw people to God if you're judging them. This story is a very important story because it shows like what he received from his parents. And the truth is, Lubavitch, among particularly, manifests this trait. Secular people pride themselves on being non-judgmental. But in this area, Lubavitch manifests the Baal Shem Tov's trait of not being judgmental. You can go to a Lubavitch place and be accepted for who you are. That's my Rebbe Shlomo was like that. He was on the highest level of non-judgmental. In fact, around a year ago, I saw a bumper sticker. The day of non-judgment is at hand. Would that it was so. But you see, the Baal Shem Tov was a Maggid. Now we have the Baal Shem Tov born. As a boy, his parents died at an early age. Some sources say 3, some 5. And he was taken care of by some of the townspeople. And they sent him to Cheder, to religious elementary school. But he kept on running away. And he'd go in the woods and they'd catch him, bring him back to school, and he'd run away again. He was a truant. And what this prefigures, you see, the teaching of Judaism in the Cheder was rote and rough. They would slap the kids, wrap their hands. So this prefigures that he ran away from the conventional rote.
Actually, it's not my job. My job is to say speed.
And then I
He'll
say action.
So stand by and speed.
Action.
So the Baal Shem Tov was orphaned at an early age. Some sources say 3, some 5. And he was taken care of by some townspeople. And he was going to Cheder, to religious school, elementary school, but he kept on running away into the woods. And they would catch him and bring him back. He'd run away again until they gave up. So what this prefigures, the teaching of Judaism in those times was rote and rough. They would slap the kids, wrap them on the knuckles. And he ran away from that. So this prefigures his departure from the conventional rote teaching of Judaism. And in addition, he was in the woods. He would hang out in the woods. So he was a nature person. He was. See, Judaism is, in exile, is indoors. When we're not in exile, we're outdoors. So the Baal Shem Tov was outdoors. And this is a part of his legacy that was lost, basically. See, the hidden tzaddikim, the hidden mystics, would travel around as wanderers, many of them. Others were manual laborers. And the Baal Shem Tov was doing this. And they were out under the open sky. Okay. Okay. So the Baal Shem Tov was adopted, basically, as a boy. He was hanging out in the woods all the time. He met one of these wandering hidden mystics. And he was adopted and recruited into the movement. You know, the Essenes, who were celibate, used to recruit people. But there were many orphans at that time because of the turmoil and the disease and all the other situations. So orphans were a good candidate for being adopted into a spiritual movement like this. Baal Shem Tov joined the movement, and the person who adopted him is unnamed in the stories. Sort of peculiar. It doesn't seem to go, I felt, in a story today. You can't leave, if he's with the guy for 3 years, you can't leave him unnamed. It's ridiculous. So in my book, I named him. I named him Shlomo Zalman, after my Rebbe, Reb Shlomo Kolobach, and my teacher, Rabbi Zalman Shakta Shalomi. So, and I discovered in some Hasidic source afterwards that the name Shlomo Zalman, which is a traditional name, has a mystic aspect to it. I lost the source. I don't know where it is. All right, look it up. So he was went into this mystic movement, mystic wanderers, and when he was 16, he was on a mission for them. And he stopped in a small town, in a shtetl, and put up in a Jewish inn, where there was a Jewish innkeeper named Aaron Moshe, and the innkeeperess Zlata Rivka. And these two people were very simple, not knowledgeable Jewishly, but like the simple people of that time, they used repeated devotional sentences. Basically, there's an early, authentic Jewish teaching about mantra use. She said, and I have to look because I can't remember this. I have to read this.
Go ahead.
Umuvarach Bilam Ve'ed.
I'm sorry, I paused the camera. Would you mind
Okay.
starting again? Thank you.
So he said, Baruch Hu Umuvarach Bilam Ve'ed. She said, Yivarach Yihiyeh Shmo HaKodesh. His words meant, God is blessed forever and ever. Her words meant something similar, let God's name be blessed for all eternity. Something very similar. They said it constantly, and as a mantra. Now, it happened to be the Baal Shem Tov's birthday. Chai Elul, the 18th of the Hebrew month of Elul, which we celebrate today. And as traditional, he went into the woods to recite Psalms. And as he was reciting Psalms, Elijah the prophet appeared to him in a mystic vision. And he'd never seen Elijah before himself. He'd seen Elijah when he was together with some of the senior members of the movement, or in a group, but never alone. And Elijah had an enigmatic smile on his face. The Baal Shem Tov didn't understand what Elijah was smiling about, but Elijah explained that the reverberations in heaven from this mystic use of the mantra that these two simple people were doing had greater impression in heaven than big Kabbalists. They made a greater impression in heaven than the study of big Kabbalists and their meditations. This is astonishing. You see, the hidden tzaddikim sided with the common people against the aloof rabbinic class. So they already had a good opinion of the ordinary people. But this was something new. This was greater. The Baal Shem Tov is told by Elijah that simple people who are devout and use, let's say, a mantra, have more of an impression in heaven than great Kabbalists. So it means that they're awesome. So this became the Baal Shem Tov's desire to not only have the Kabbalistic end, but to have the simplicity, have the simple faith of simple Jews. And this was one of the reasons that his movement was so successful, because he didn't condescend. He tried to train his great disciples, who were most of them scholars, and Kabbalists. He would send them to like a butcher to learn how to have trust in God. Or he'd send them to a tailor to be honest, learn to be honest. Because there are certain traits that simple people excel intellectuals. This is the main reason why the Baal Shem Tov's movement spread and why it's great. Now today, we don't have these like working class Jews. So I've always wondered, what's the connection today? So the Baal Shem Tov didn't judge people. He didn't judge these people. He revered them when they were pious. So I'm trying to figure out, perhaps today, it's the secular people who have a passion for justice, that most Jewish of traits. That the religious people should not look down, that these people, see, sad to say, our brothers and sisters who are separated from God are missing something precious. They don't know what they're missing. But God forbid to look down on them, because some of them are so drawn. It's a great passion to justice. You know, some woman who teaches at Esha Torah online, Sarah Riegler, she was very big in a Hindu ashram. She was going to be a guru. And she found Judaism. She was Jewish, but she found her Judaism and came back. And she wrote a eulogy of her father, who was a doctor. And he was totally secular, had no interest in God whatsoever. And she wrote a beautiful eulogy. Her father, the doctor, always helped poor people. He was always helping people. So he didn't know God as a in a revealed way, but he was manifesting God. Maybe that's the attitude we have. To draw our fellow Jews to God without looking down. God forbid. You know, when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, I was a wild, revolutionary. What my friend of mine called the youthquake of the 60s and 70s. And, but then I learned, it's a whole story, but I learned, where's my passion for justice coming from? It's coming from God. Where is this coming from? And that paralleled Moses' experience. Moses in his inception killed the overseer. Then he tried to prevent the two Jews from fighting. Then he saved the Midianite shepherdesses from the boys who were bullying them. He was on fire for justice. And then, but he was political. And he took refuge in Midian. He couldn't come back as Che Guevara and overthrow the Pharaoh. He came back when he had at the burning bush. He learned how he could help. He was on fire inside. He's living a pastoral life with his father-in-law Yitro, and his brothers and sisters are suffering as slaves. So his fire burst out. The inner discord between his outer life of suburban life. He saw the burning bush. And he went back as a prophet. Let my people go. Not Che Guevara. Not politics. In fact, Shlomo said, what would happen if we would have gone back, like the Russian Revolution? The rich people killed the poor people, and then the revolution, the poor people killed the rich people. That's not the Jewish path. So, forgot what I was talking about.
Topic. You earlier said that today Judaism needs a revival. Could you discuss that and how the Baal Shem Tov might be, if you were around now, what that revival would be like?
Yeah. Judaism is in a funk, like all the other traditional religions. Modern people most of them can't accept certain claims. And but we've learned, and I attribute this to largely to Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, how to access the great spiritual power of our tradition in a non-orthodox way. The Baal Shem Tov is the energy behind this. You know, his teachings are so similar to what we believe in this generation that they seem commonplace. It's paradoxical. He's so important that his teachings seem commonplace and familiar because we already believe them. Non-judgmentalism, love, joy. What we can learn from the Baal Shem Tov, and it's for the next level, is devotion. Devotion. Now, people are starting to have it in Jewish Renewal, and I'm not Jewish Renewal. I'm not affiliated. But there's devotion. You see the same kind of devotion in Jewish Renewal that you see in Lubavitch. And the Baal Shem Tov is the ancestor of the Hasidim and the Neo-Hasidim alike. And there are stories about the Baal Shem Tov where he tried to make a shidduch between two parts of the Jewish people. He went to visit to Israel to see the Or HaChaim, Rabbi Chaim ben Attar, this great Sephardic sage. And he couldn't make it. But he felt that if he would meet this Sephardic sage, the Messiah would come, the Mashiach would come. Why? Because if you get together, if you unite the Jewish people, the Messiah will come. The Baal Shem Tov tried to get together Mendel of Premishlan. This is the grandfather of the famous Rebbe, who was a great Kabbalist and sage and scholar, with Moshe the shepherd, the ignorant, unlearned, pious Jew. The Messiah would come. The Baal Shem Tov would be the shidduch maker. So he believed that if we unite the Jewish people, the Messiah will come. And if we could unite the Hasidim and the Neo-Hasidim, it'd be awesome. There are some Neo-Hasidim, and there are some Hasidim and Neo-Hasidim who are friends. I have close friends in Lubavitch. And see, my view is there are two camps. King David, before he became king, would go out on raids. He had a band. One time they brought back spoils, and he wanted to divide it equally between the people who went out on the raid and the people who guarded the camp, guarded the baggage. And the people who went out on the raid said they want more. They don't want an equal division. They risked more. And King David said, he wasn't king yet. David said, no. Shaveh b'shaveh, equal division. What is the meaning of this? The way I understand it. There are people who are going out on raids. There are people in Jewish Renewal, in Reform, elsewhere, who are trying to repair Judaism, to make it appeal to our modern Jewish folk. When you go out on a raid, you can't carry baggage. And when you're trying to discover a new path, you're dropping off half the religion. People who are experimental in this way, they're dropping off half the religion. They're not doing so much. But what they are doing, God gives them great credit for. They're respecting women. They're respecting other religions. They're respecting non-Jews. God gives them great credit for this. But the Orthodox are guarding the baggage in the camp. If everybody would be experimenting, we'd lose the religion. We have a religion of one of the great religions of humankind. It's a working spiritual system. It can produce holy people. But if everybody was going out experimenting, nobody would be preserving these great things. We need people to preserve the customs and the observances fully until we figure out how to rework the circuitry. So the Orthodox are preserving the religion. They're both necessary. They're going to be rewarded shaveh b'shaveh, equally. If we just have the Orthodox, most of the Jewish people are drifting off. They're not buying. If we just had the experimental people, they're going to lose most of the religion because can't do it. It's too complex to be searching and carrying the baggage. It's impossible. So we need this. And the Baal Shem Tov was the one who unites both camps. And the Baal Shem Tov, his teaching of love, follows the teaching of the great rabbis, Hillel and Akiba. That's what the essence of Judaism is, love. So the Baal Shem Tov had two main practices. Prayer, Father, Father, as he calls that in the parable, and loving people. In Kabbalah, we talk about Ratzov V'Shov, running and returning. You run in spiritual practice to connect with God in a solitary way, and you come back to manifest, to connect with God in this world. The Holy One, you connect to the Holy One, the transcendent God, and then you come back and connect to the immanent God, the Shekhinah. So, the Baal Shem Tov said, see, most people think, you want to get more religious? You meditate more, you daven more, you separate yourself. The Baal Shem Tov said it's not the case. He said you get higher spiritually from loving and serving other people than you will from any solitary spiritual practice. So his two paths are davening, which is basically a private meditation on God, go up to heaven and get the unification energy, and you return and experience the unity on earth by serving and loving other people. That's the running and returning. You run towards God and then return to connect in this world. So Shlomo, Reb Shlomo, he had the house of love and prayer. Those are the two things, love and prayer. Those are the two ingredients. And prayer, the Baal Shem Tov was a great davener. You know, I wrote a booklet called Real Davening. Jewish prayer as a spiritual practice and a form of meditation for beginning and experienced daveners. Silent meditation has a great cachet and press agent in our time. But prayer is an exalted practice. People think, too many Jews think prayer is for dummies. Maybe I should write a book, Prayer for Dummies. But prayer is an unbelievably powerful practice. But it's difficult. It's strange. I didn't believe in God until my mid-20s. And to daven to a personal God is away from most Jews. Too difficult. The reason secular Jews find Kabbalah so interesting is Kabbalah is almost atheistic. The Ein Sof, the infinite. It's not the personal God. It's the oneness. It's almost atheistic. It's an easy entrance. But God also manifests as a personal energy. And to talk to God, to feel that love, the juiciness, it's precious. But you have to daven with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. I'll tell you a story. The Baal Shem Tov heard a heavenly voice saying that Moshe the shepherd served God better than he did. Curious, the Baal Shem Tov got a few of his Hasidim, got into a wagon, and set off at the place where he was told this Moshe the shepherd resided. He got out of the wagon, and they approached Moshe through a field. Moshe was on the hillside, gathering his sheep with his shepherd's horn. He gathered the sheep, and he led them to a trough, and was watering them. And by this time, the Baal Shem Tov and his disciples were within range to hear and see. And they stayed out of the picture, and they saw Moshe say, God, you're so great. I was an orphan at an early age. I never learned how to study Torah. I don't know how to daven, don't know how to pray. I don't know how to serve you at all. What can I do for you? I know. I can blow my shepherd's horn like a shofar. They blew his shepherd's horn with all his might. For half an hour until he collapsed because he gave it every bit of his energy. And he was almost unconscious on the ground. He lay that way for a long time till he revived and jumped up. He said, God, it's not enough. You're so great and wonderful. And I'm so small. How can I serve you? What can I do for you? I know. I can sing shepherd songs. He started singing shepherd songs. Sang shepherd songs for half an hour. Zorba the Jew. Then he fell down without any energy on the ground and lay that way prone for half an hour. Then he jumped up and said, God, what can I do for you? It's not enough that I blow my shepherd's horn, that I sing songs for you. How can I serve you? He said, I know what I can do. And he stood on his head and waved his feet in the air for God. And then he did somersaults for God. He somersaulted down the hill and then ran up the hill. And somersaulted down the hill and ran up the hill. Did cartwheels for God. And he collapsed because he gave all his energy to worship God. And then he lay that way for a long while and finally jumped up a final time and said, God, it's not enough. How can I serve you? What can I do for you? He said, I know. Yesterday, the owner of this flock made a feast for all his servants. And he gave each of us a silver coin. And God, you support and sustain the whole world. And me too. Moshe the shepherd. So I'm going to give this coin back to you. And he threw the coin up in the air. And at that moment, the Baal Shem Tov saw a hand come from heaven and grasped the coin. And he turned to his Hasidim and said, now I know the meaning of what it says in the Torah, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. You know, people love these kind of stories that show the appreciation. How many religions have a story about Moshe the shepherd, who knows nothing, is serving God better than the greatest mystic in the tradition? People love these stories, but they don't take them seriously. If you take this story seriously, it changes your whole attitude to God and to Judaism. You may not know any Torah. You don't know any Hebrew. You can't read the prayer book. You know nothing. But can you somersault for God? Can you do anything for God? Whatever you do, if you do it with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might, it's enough and more. So if you take this stuff seriously, and I want to tell people to take it seriously, that's the Baal Shem Tov's teaching. You get to the highest. Shlomo used to say about people, what do we know? What do we know? And it's true. What do we know? Moshe the shepherd doesn't look that impressive, perhaps. But if you are devoted, you can reach the highest levels. It's the Baal Shem Tov story of a man who knew nothing, but he repeated the alphabet as a mantra. And he got to be the highest mystic level. People don't take it seriously. They still feel, I go to synagogue and I can't understand the prayers. Okay, try to do it. But have faith that if you are devoted, you'll get to the goal. The Baal Shem Tov said, he who grasps a part of the whole grasps the whole. If you do a little bit for God, if you get a hold of God for 1 minute a day, you have connection to the Creator. If you get a hold of God's pinky, you're connected to God. You'll get a tremendous influx of light and life and love and energy. See, I learned the Baal Shem Tov taught, so it says this 1,000,000 times, continuous God consciousness, dveikut, bli hefsek rega, without a moment's cessation. This is what he taught for the mystic aspirants. To have God consciousness without a moment's cessation. Now, you're living in a world where there's a God. God is ever present. Shlomo was there. Shlomo was in a state of mystic consciousness all the time. He had an open heart all the time, by the way. That's even more important. The Baal Shem Tov taught to have God consciousness without a moment's cessation. But he taught for ordinary people to have 1 moment a day. See, for mystic aspirants, the elite, without one moment's cessation. But for ordinary people, 1 moment a day. Pray for real. God, appear to me. I'm giving this charity for you because I love you. I don't even know who you are, but I'm giving this charity. Be for real. And you get a tremendous influx of divine light.
What about the Beshtin and halacha?
You know, Kabbalah talks about religion and spirituality this way. There are vessels and light. Vessels are solid and empty. That's the religion. They're supposed to contain the light. That's the spirituality, which is conceived of as fluidic, liquid. The purpose of the vessel, of the religious observance or custom, is to access the light, to contain the light. People are on different, bring the light into the world. People are on different levels as far as where they are whether they're light people or vessel people. It's a spectrum. So the light people, like the hippies, or many people today, their greatest fear of a light person is getting trapped in a vessel. They don't want the regulations, the rules. They want the freedom of spirituality, fluidic, light. But the Kabbalists say that if the light is not contained in a vessel, it dissipates. So the goal is to have the light in the vessel. The greatest fear of vessel people, they're people who love the religion. Structure, not your whole life searching for what the right way is. Finding it. Judaism is the right way for me. Shabbat, every seventh day. In the morning I meditate by davening. A regulated life. It's beautiful. Beautiful. But if it doesn't contain the light, which is the purpose of these vessels, it's rigid, empty, and dark. And the vessel corrodes. If the light is not in the vessel degrades, it corrodes. So the religion becomes rote. So you have to have light and vessels, religion and spirituality together. But the traditional view is you have to do everything. It's not my view. My view is you do what works. Little or much. It says in the Talmud, it's all the same whether you do little or much. What counts is that your heart is directed to heaven. And there are stories about people davening like 4 minutes, but that's the highest. It could be little, but is it for real? If it's for real, that's all. It says, Simcha Bunim of Pshischa, Simcha Bunim of the Tan of Pshischa, one of the early Hasidic rabbis said, it says in the Midrash, God says, open to me like the eye of a needle, and I'll open to you like the massive gates of the temple. He said, don't we know many people are opening a little bit to God? Where are they getting these great rewards? He said, you have to open only a little bit, but it has to be through and through, like the eye of a needle. It has to be for real. So you only have to do a little bit, but if it's for real, you'll get great rewards. So I use a parable that I learned from a secular source, that a craftsman, is not interested in theory. He's interested in getting the job done. So Jewishly, the job is to get close to God. It's not a matter of theory. You can see if you're getting somewhere. Are you getting close to God? Certain practices will help you. Certain practices might not. But do the ones that get you somewhere. And if a practice doesn't work for you, put it to the side. Don't keep banging your head against the wall. Maybe at a future time it will work. But have your Judaism associated with something that's vibrant, alive, gives you joy. So the Baal Shem Tov, in fact, the story of the two thrones is the epitome of this. But it's a long story.
No, it's all right. I can do.
my personal relation to the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov is a mysterious character. Like I said, he's a collective soul that appeals to everybody. He somehow is the fountainhead of this Hasidic stuff. And Shlomo, my Rebbe, Shlomo Kolobach, I imagine was like the Baal Shem Tov. And Shlomo had so many character traits of the Baal Shem Tov. He put love at the center, joy, music, loving children, storytelling. Just that I imagine the Baal Shem Tov looking like him. And I felt I understood the Baal Shem Tov because knowing Shlomo. In fact, in my book, I put, there's a section or two that I added to because I knew about Shlomo. Maybe I'll read it, just a piece of it, okay? Let's see what page it's on. You may not want to use this, but you'll see. But I recently read something. I mean, it's interesting. Maybe it's not. I wrote this down, let's see. Oh, here it is. Oh. Oh, it's on the other, it's on this page. Yeah, here it is. It's just sort of interesting. This is my book. I'm not ashamed to promote it because I wrote it so people would read it. And it's a devotional scripture written with the Holy Spirit. This is, I embellished the Baal Shem Tov's portrayal of his teaching his disciples because of what I knew from my experience with Shlomo. The joy the Baal Shem Tov's disciples felt when he taught them Torah was indescribable. It was not only what he said, but how he said it and who was saying it. As soon as he opened his holy mouth, they felt elevated. The very sound of his sweet voice was like a balm to troubled souls. His face shined like an angel of God, and his words were the words of the Shekhinah speaking from his throat. He was always in a state of intense devekut when he taught Torah. Every word he said being spoken before God. He taught them Torah the way it is taught in the Garden of Eden. And his disciples could smell the fragrance of paradise that filled the room. Its perfume was so ravishing that their souls almost flew away with each word that he uttered. Everything he said was perfectly true, directly from heaven. Nothing missed the mark by the least bit. His teaching was so not measured out because there's no end to the divine wisdom that poured from his holy mouth. An ordinary Torah teacher studies and then teaches. After having scattered what he gathered, he stopped speaking. Not so the holy Baal Shem Tov, who was an ever-flowing fountain, so attached to the supernal source that when he began to speak, the fountain of divine wisdom never failed. Well, that was, my experience with Shlomo made me understand the Baal Shem Tov in many ways.
Do you think there's anyone who embodies the Baal Shem Tov today?
Shlomo did.
He's gone.
He's gone. Many people. Reb Zalman embodies the Baal Shem Tov. But so do other people. Anybody who is loves God and loves people. My Lubavitch friends. I'm thinking of that image of the Baal Shem Tov, a spark, and his face in every spark. Because when you love people, when you see their greatness, you see the Baal Shem Tov and God in every person. You know, I came up with a parable some time ago. Excuse me. A king was greatly beloved in his king. A king was greatly beloved in his kingdom, and he left his kingdom on state business. He was gone for a long time, and the people yearned for his presence. They missed him deeply, and someone got an idea. Let's make a museum, and they made a museum of statues and pictures of the king. So they missed him sorely. When they felt bereft, they went to the museum and saw pictures of him and statues of him and were comforted. We all are in the image of God. And when you look at your fellow human beings that way, you see they all manifest God. They all manifest the Baal Shem Tov. In fact, one of my great friends, Rabbi Naomi Steinberg, tells an awesome story, the Rebbe's face, that carries this very point. When your devotion to your Rebbe is great, you see the Rebbe in everybody. And you see everybody in the Rebbe. I don't know that that's my relation to the Baal Shem Tov quite, or to Shlomo, but it's good to hear.
Singing and dancing in joy. You wanna do that?
Let me precede that by something about storytelling. Because once I dance, I'm out of it. Also, the Baal Shem Tov tell jokes. Had a sense of humor. The Baal Shem Tov was a Maggid. People sometimes think of a Maggid as just a storyteller. Not the case. A Maggid is a person whose mission is to bring people back to God. Storytelling is one modality, and it's important, but it's not the only one. Inspirational speaking is another. The Baal Shem Tov was a Maggid. He's called that in some sources, in some Hasidic stories. He would go to a town when he was not yet above ground, when he was still a hidden tzaddik, a hidden mystic, go in his wagon, get out in the main square, start telling stories, and draw a crowd. And he would draw the people to God that way. I'll tell you a story about that. There's a story that he went into a town, Shargrad, where lived a rabbi who he wanted to bring close to his movement, to his nascent movement, is in formation. So he went into the town early in the morning and started to tell stories. And first, one person, two people, and a little crowd gathered. And peasants who were bringing their cattle, drawing their cow by a rope to go out to the field, forgot where they were going, to listen to the Baal Shem Tov. And men with their talis and tefillin bags under their arms would forget where they were going, and were listening to him. The whole town was listening to him. He was his stories were so enchanting and so beautiful. Now the rabbi, Yaakov Yosef, they would daven there every morning at 8. So he would get there early, and he gets there early, and the shul is locked. What's going on? And none of the regulars are there. He's furious. Where are they? They're all around the storyteller in the square, including the shamus who's supposed to open the shul. Just then, the Baal Shem Tov looks at the shamus who's in the circle and goes like this. And he goes, "Hey, I forgot to open the shul." And he runs to the shul and finds the rabbi there, smoke coming out of his ears, fuming. And the rabbi says, "Where were you?" Where are the regulars? He says, there's somebody telling stories in the square, and I was enchanted. I had to stay. The whole town's there. The rabbi says, get that storyteller and bring him back here. I'm going to give him a whipping. So the shamus goes back, the caretaker goes back. The Baal Shem Tov is finished by that time. And he finds the Baal Shem Tov in his inn and tells him the rabbi demands his presence. The Baal Shem Tov goes, gets back to the rabbi, says, are you the person who is preventing the community from davening in B'tzibur, in congregation? Yes, Rabbi. But please don't be angry. Can I tell you a story? The rabbi says, okay. The Baal Shem Tov tells him a story, and he's soothed. And he starts treating the Baal Shem Tov. Formerly he was talking to the Baal Shem Tov as he's the great one. The Baal Shem Tov is a schlepper. So he was soothed by the story, and he starts talking to the Baal Shem Tov as if he's his equal. And then he hears that story, and he tells another story. And he already is taking the Baal Shem Tov as a master because of the stories. The Baal Shem Tov says, listen to this story. I was traveling with 3 horses in my carriage, brown, white, and black. And the horses wouldn't neigh. And a peasant, a Gentile peasant coming in a carriage from the other direction yelled out to me, loosen the reins. I loosened the reins, and my horses were able to neigh. Do you understand what I'm saying? The rabbi said, yes. And he became his disciple and walked with him through the town, and all the people realized that their rabbi became the disciple of Baal Shem Tov. So he meant, don't hold the reins of religion too tight on yourself or on others. If they're tight, you can't be joyful. You can't neigh. You can't have a true experience of Judaism. So the Baal Shem Tov would draw people, the common people, and even the elite, through storytelling. And he was a great storyteller. He had he started a tradition in storytelling. There's a famous, a wonderful saying of the Baal Shem Tov that, see, the essence of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism, is Masa Merkava, the account of the divine chariot. The prophet Ezekiel, in his first encounter with God, saw a chariot flying through the heavens, containing God's throne, and pulled by these weird horses or hybrid animals. They're all angels. See, God's chariot in heaven is all angels. There are wheel angels, Ophanim. There are these animals, these angelic animals that pull the chariot. Chayot HaKodesh, holy animals. Everything is angelic. And the Ma'aseh Merkava, the account of the divine chariot, is you meditate on the angelic service of God and try to imitate it. The angels are your models for how to serve God. So, for instance, I could explain some of the things, but I won't. But the Baal Shem Tov said that when you tell stories of holy people or ordinary people who rise to holiness on occasion, it's the account of the divine chariot. Because Maaseh means story. It's the story of the chariot. Story is being the chariot. Because it says in the Midrash, He'avot hein hein ha-merkava. The patriarchs and matriarchs and all holy people are the chariot. The chariot, God's vehicle in heaven is the angels. But God's vehicle on earth is us, the holy people or ordinary people, when we rise to greatness. We're God's vehicle on earth. Chariot is the same word as car. C-H-A-R is the root. C-A-R. So when you meditate on someone telling a story of a holy act and a holy person, you're meditating on God's chariot. And you vicariously participate in that spiritual level. When you hear a story about somebody who is giving all their money to the poor, that's a great spiritual level. You're vicariously participating in it by listening to the story deeply. So storytelling is not something insignificant. It is equivalent to the highest kind of Torah study. Because Ma'aseh Merkava, the account of the divine chariot, is recognized in the tradition as being the greatest, deepest Torah study. So telling stories is awesome. The Baal Shem Tov encouraged it. So he was a Maggid. but you don't see that word associated with him too often. A Maggid is typically a person who's itinerant, travels and brings people, tries to inspire people. That's what Shlomo was. Shlomo did not use the word Maggid, but he was a Maggid. Various of the early Rebbes were Megiddim. Various of the early Rebbes are called the Maggid of Mizrich, the Maggid of Chernobyl, the Maggid of Koznitz. And in fact, I believe in my research that all the early Rebbes were called Maggid, because before the word Rebbe came into usage, they didn't know what to compare these people to. The early Rebbes, what were they? The closest they knew was a Maggid, because the rabbis of the time did not give inspiring speeches. They didn't give the sermons. The rabbis just ruled on halachic matters, legal matters. The traveling Megiddim, the traveling storytellers, qua inspirational speakers, were the ones who gave the sermons. Megiddim. So these Megiddim were crucial in reviving Judaism in the time of the Baal Shem Tov. It was a class of people. They traveled and they were the inspirational speakers and storytellers. They helped Hasidism grow rapidly. And I feel that's going to happen again today. So that's what Shlomo was. That's what I am, filling up 1/10 of his mighty footprint. But I feel we have to revive the role of the Maggid, to revive Judaism. And so I started a school 7 years ago, a program to train people and ordain them as Megiddim. I've now given smicha ordination to 29 people. And Reb Zalman is a big supporter of the program. In fact, he's teaching it this term. And because he also believes that the more people we get out there speaking inspirationally, the more people are being drawn. You don't have to be an expert in every branch of Judaism to inspire somebody else. You have to know more than them, or be more on fire than them. When I was just newly interested in Judaism, I was on fire. I could bring back people in droves because, I was like, tremendous spiritual energy was coming out of me. So you don't have to be an expert in everything. But we're training people in text study, in storytelling, in inspirational speaking, in the wisdom of the Maggid, meaning how do you deal with people? Like the 4 sons of the Haggadah, you have to deal with people in different ways. It says, the rabbis say, know what to answer, not be coarse. Know what to answer, a skeptic. The people, our secular friends, have the same problems we had. They don't believe in a God. They don't believe in a personal God. They find the chosen people troublesome. All the problems they had, most of them we had. But to the extent we've resolved them, we can help them make the next step. So I'm following the Baal Shem Tov's footprints. And in fact, in my smicha document, I say, I have it in the front of 2 of my books. It's quite beautiful. Shlomo, this is my book, Jewish Tales of Mystic Joy. Shlomo created this spontaneously when he gave me smicha. Reb Zalman also gave me smicha belatedly. I say, it's in Hebrew. Shlomo said, Oh, I guess I put this in there myself. I put in the smicha document I give now, that in the golden chain of lineage of Rabbi Shlomo Karlebach, of the Baal Shem Tov, of Achi Ashaloni, of Moshe Rabbeinu, and up to the heart of heaven. So we're in a lineage of the Baal Shem Tov, because the Baal Shem Tov was doing this kind of stuff. Excuse me. A Hasidic book I read years ago had a deep insight into what kind of environment the Baal Shem Tov came. The people were very sad. The conditions were miserable. And the sadness had infiltrated their religion. It was bad enough that the people are sad because of they're being harassed by anti-Semitism or pogroms, but it infiltrated the religion. So the religion became sad. It's like the worst disaster, you see? So they believed that, like, a Maggid would go around, this is the Megiddim who preceded the Baal Shem Tov, and they would tell the people, if bad things are happening to you, it's because you sinned. And they berate them, make them, and rebuke them, make them even more miserable. So the religion became like a source of misery. The Baal Shem Tov had to break out of that trap, and he did. The Baal Shem Tov, by having no fear of anybody, see, his father told him, have no fear of anybody but God. And he did that. And so he was able to get the joy and love. And so that's what we want today, joy and love. So the Baal Shem Tov, the Hasidic movement, everybody knows, is characterized by dancing and singing. It's a major part of it. In fact, there's a story about the first Lubavitcher Rebbe who was giving a talk, and an old man, a simple man, was in the audience grimacing throughout. And at the end of the talk, the Rebbe said, what was the matter? He said, Rebbe, I didn't understand anything what you were saying. The Rebbe said, oh, I'll explain it to you. And he sang a wordless melody. And as he sang, a broad smile came over the old man's face. He said, Rebbe, now I understand. The melodies contain the message. The music is the message. And Shlomo said, in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, that the Baal Shem Tov, it says, revive the circle dance. He used to sit with his disciples, and they'd sit in a circle, and they'd put their hands on each other's shoulders and sing. And Shlomo said, in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, that when you put your hands on someone's shoulder in a circle, it's a physical manifestation of your resolve to love your neighbor as yourself. So beautiful. I tell people that when I ask them to put their hand on their friend's shoulder and sing. And the Hasidic tradition is that the Baal Shem Tov revived the circle dance. So we have to revive dancing. I've discovered the Baal Shem Tov was criticized. His disciples came to him and said, the misnagdim, the opponents, criticize us, saying we're for all our dancing and revelry. The Baal Shem Tov said, tell him this parable. A fiddler said himself was playing in a town square, and the music was so ravishing that everybody came and listened, and they were carried away, enraptured, and they started to dance ecstatically. And then a deaf man came on the scene. He did not hear the music, and seeing the people dancing so ecstatically, he thought they're crazy, they're madmen. But it's because he didn't hear the music. The Baal Shem Tov said, my disciples hear the music that emanates from all of creation. How could you not dance? How could you not dance? So I've realized recently that dancing is not only the high point of my worship, it's the essence. So I'm trying in every way I can to encourage people to dance. In groups, there are Hasidic steps. We've learned from stories from the Baal Shem Tov's movement. We've learned from their story, from their music, their melodies. But we have to learn from their dancing. Dancing with 100 other people, with a simple step, is mind-blowing. It's incredible. We have to get steps, Hasidic steps. We have to have solitary dancing. The Baal Shem Tov and others would dance in ecstasy. And it inspires people to see someone dance. People who are qualified, spiritually and physically, have to do this. I encourage people. I give them smicha as a holy dancer. The Baal Shem Tov's movement was called the Holy Dancers. One of the epithets that we used against the Baal Shem Tov, they call them the Holy Dancers, like the Holy Rollers. It was going on at the same time. There was something in worldwide. The Holy Rollers were doing somersaults. Some of the early Hasidim would do somersaults for God, like in the story of Moshe the Shepherd. They would do somersaults for God. Just a couple more things. There's just a few more stories that are very short and very good. So you may want to use them independently. I'll just tell them. Okay. When the Baal Shem Tov when the Baal Shem Tov was not yet a famous person. He was living in a rural area, had an inn. His wife would basically take care of the inn. And he would spend most of the week in his hut of solitude where he'd meditate, study Torah, daven. He would come back and he would be in such a high state. He'd come back for Shabbat and his wife would give him the challah, a motzi, for the blessing of the bread. He would take one bite and soar into the upper worlds and was in deep trance. And she would normally call out his name to get him back, but he was beyond that. She didn't know what to do. Finally, she took their baby, Adel, the daughter, and put the infant on her father's lap. And as infants do, the baby reached for her father's white beard. Not white beard, for her father's beard. And pulled on it. And he came back to body consciousness. Because when a child, it's wonderful to be flying in the supernal heavens by mystic meditation and davening. But when a child or someone in the image of God needs help, you're supposed to be attentive. That's the Baal Shem Tov's way. Rutz of a shov. But when someone needs help, you're there. You're not meditating. So the tradition explains about this little anecdote, charming anecdote. By the way, the Baal Shem Tov's wife, after this, knew how to get her husband back into body consciousness. So it says God's beard in the Kabbalah is his attributes of mercy. The 13 attributes of God's mercy are his beard, which is in 13 strands. So they say that when we pray, we're pulling on God's beard like a child. And that directs God's attention to us. That's the model. Isn't that sweet as sugar? So sweet. We're pulling on God's beard like a father to draw his attention to us, to listen to our needs. Sorry. After the Baal Shem Tov passed away, years later a book was written of his teachings, that contained his teachings, by Yaakov Yosef of Polnoi, his great early disciple. And but the anti-Hasidim, the opponents, were burning the book. They set a date in a certain town to burn the book, to squelch the movement. And one of the Baal Shem Tov's early disciples, the Maggid of Zlatchev, Yechiel Michal Zlatchev, was outraged by this. How can they do this? And he was going to go to try to stop it. Meanwhile, his son Yosef, who was a boy of, let's say, 10, became terribly ill suddenly and fell into a coma. He might die. But the father went off to take care of this thing with the book and told his family, if God forbid he dies, don't bury him before I come back. So he went off, and the boy died. Well, they thought he died. And they took him off the bed and lay him on the ground with his feet facing towards the door and lit a candle. But they didn't bury him because of his father, what he'd said. A day later, Yosef started to sweat. I was leaving the body. I was leaving my body. I was dying. And I went up into heaven, and the heavenly court was meeting. And the angel took me to the door, but I couldn't go in. They were deciding my fate inside. I didn't know why I was there, really. And I was standing at the door. And while I was there, my father came. And he said, Yosef, what are you doing here? I said, Father, I don't know. He said, I'll speak to the heavenly court on your behalf, but I have to take care of the book. So he left and went to complain about the book. You can't do this. You can't allow this book to be burned. And the court told him, this is a matter beyond our jurisdiction. You have to go to higher court. there's appellate courts, Supreme Courts in heaven. So he left his son, forgot about him. The son was waiting, frightened by the door. The author of the book, Yaakov Yosef of Polnoi, came and said, Yosef, what are you doing here? He said, Rabbi, I don't know. Could you please speak to the court on my behalf? He said, I surely will, but I have to take care of my book. He went to the court and complained about the book. They're burning the book. They want to burn the book. Can't be allowed. It's the only book that contains the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. They said it's a matter for a higher court. He left to go to the higher court, forgetting about the boy, his friend's son. Sometime afterwards, Yosef heard shouts in heaven, make way, make way. It's the holy Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov himself, who was deceased years ago, appeared and said, Yosef, what are you doing here? He said, Holy Rabbi, I don't know, but can you speak to the court on my behalf? The Baal Shem Tov said, I certainly will. And he went to the court and came back to me and said, you can go back down. I've taken care of it. But Yosef said, by that time, I wanted to find out what was going on in heaven. I didn't want to go back. I said, no, I'd like to stay up here. But two burly angels grabbed me by the arms and dragged me back, down, down, down. And I saw from above that my body was lying on the floor. And I didn't want to go back. It was disgusting to me. I said, they forced me to get back in. Go back down. And I went back down, and I started to perspire. And I'm telling you this story. So, the father forgot his own son because he wanted to preserve the book of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. The author of the book forgot his friend's son because he wanted to preserve the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov in the book. But the Baal Shem Tov himself, who never wrote a book, and his teachings were to love people, not books. He did not forget the child. He saved the child's life because he was not about books. He was about people. The Maggid of Mezrich, the great successor to the Baal Shem Tov of the Hasidic movement, said, I wish that I could kiss a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll, like the Baal Shem Tov kissed a child. And Yitzhak Buxbaum say, why didn't he say, I wish I could kiss a child like the Baal Shem Tov kissed a child? Then he would have reached the Baal Shem Tov's level. But although he was greater than great, already, the Baal Shem Tov came to repair this bookishness, this dastardly bookishness that infects Judaism. And when he died, it started to revert. Shlomo Karlebach never wrote a book. I wrote 10. But the people who are typically the people who are the highest people don't write books. They're living it. They don't have the time to write books. There's a Sufi story about somebody where a Sufi master came onto his dervish, his chassid, and saw him doing something. He said, what are you doing? He said, I'm writing out stories of the Sufi masters for somebody who asked me. He said, forget that. Instead of writing about Sufi masters, why don't you become one? So I don't I'm not against stories of the holy people, but the idea is that the highest thing is to manifest this stuff and to love people. The Baal Shem Tov, one of the Rebbe said, left no books behind him, but he left people with their hearts on fire for God. Yeah. I want people to see that Judaism is joy. ways of dancing religiously. One way is to dance a solo, to represent the community, to dance for God and inspire yourself, and inspire other people. And I remember how comforted I was years ago. The greatest, most ecstatic Rebbe of early times was Levi Yitzhak Buxbaum. And he was an ecstatic of massive proportions. And I read where he said once that part of his dancing, part of his ecstasy, was to inspire other people. And that comforted me greatly, because when I dance, it's a manifestation of my own ecstasy, but also I want to inspire other people. I want to inspire other people. So, and I give people who are able to do this, I give them a smicha and a promise to protect them. See, people are scared. I have a lot of chutzpah, and people are scared to do this. They're scared to stand up and start dancing alone, because the evil eye, people look at you badly, but I give them a promise that I'll protect them. I'll protect them spiritually from any harm if they dance when they feel the